As you may know, ghouls and gals, Warhammer Fantasy is pretty much an allegory for the medieval world. Sure, there are elves and orcs and all sorts of magical beasties, but when you look at the locations and the names of locations, it's easy to see the parallels. That means in some cases we see real history told through the mad lens of Warhammer as well, such as in the Great Crusades against Araby. In the mid-1400s of the Imperial calendar, neither Chaos nor the Orcs were up to anything, it seemed, as there was so little pressure on the Empire, Bretonnia and the surrounding nations that they decided they could spend a century kicking about Araby, taking all the gold and destroying all the fortresses they dared. The Great Crusade against Araby saw the biggest collection of knights in the Old World's history and changed the landscape of it for centuries to come. I focus on the end times a lot on this channel, but today we're going to go over another major Warhammer event in the Great Crusade against Araby. So, how did the Great Crusade begin? Well, it wasn't like the real world crusades. Sigmar didn't just tell the Emperor to go and steal some gold and reclaim his holy land. This crusade wasn't really religious, not to begin with anyway. The conflict began with one Sultan Jafar. Yep, the same name as the Aladdin villain. And you're telling me this guy is a bad guy too? No, he couldn't be. This Jafar was also a sorcerer, but instead of a parrot on his shoulder he had Skaven allies spying for him in exchange for Warpstone. Jafar also made pacts with Chaos and was all around a bad dude, but with the Skaven at his side he managed to take power in Araby. Araby might not have had the same military might as other human nations, but it was rich, and money can buy everything, and so the Skaven believed they'd backed a real winner in Jafar. They thought with him, they could have their puppet take over the rest of the old world too, and so they had Jafar invade Estalia, telling him the southern nation was planning on attacking Araby first. The Estalian city of Margrita took the brunt of the assault, and as Estalia burned, King Louis the Righteous of Bretonnia realised the Arabians could be coming for him next. And so he sent a letter to Emperor Frederick III of the Empire, asking if he could stop all this civil warring so he could deal with the real problem. Frederick got everyone around a table at Altdorf, which was a bit far away from the invasion, but he did manage to get a bunch of knights to go and liberate Estalia with the Bretonnians. There was a slightly religious element here, as the Grand Theogenist did bless the conflict, allowing Templars to go as well as the secular knights, but it was mostly to do with the threat of invasion that the other nations got involved. The Arabians were then kicked out of Estalia, but fearing that Jafar would come again and getting a taste of that sweet desert gold, the knights of the old world decided their fight wasn't done, and so they pursued the Arabians further into their own territory. It's worth noting that Jafar did leave a bunch of places very badly damaged, and so the temper of the old worlders was up when they decided he had to be put down. It wasn't just for the gold. Great fleets arrived to take the knights to Araby, but by the time they got there, Jafar had the time he needed to prepare his own defences. At the start of the conflict, Jafar had hoped the heat and arduous journey to his city of Al-Haik would make the knights give up, and even though there were some casualties, he failed to understand that these guys had a lot of honour riding on them sacking more than just the towns nearest to the coast. Jafar's own people also saw this as a chance to rise against him, meaning he was soon facing more fires than he could put out. Realising time was in fact against him, Jafar set out to meet the knights in the open field. He was confident still, as his sorcerers raised desert elementals and he had chaos at his back. Specifically, the Great Warp Chicken himself, Kairos Fateweaver summoned great storms and a demonic legion to aid Jafar. Once the demons suddenly turned their back on Jafar though, he realised he had far too many angry knights for him to deal with. He tried to flee, hoping to fight another day, but ended up pierced by a Bretonnian lance. At this point, the Bretonnians were pretty happy to pack up and go home. They'd spent a year in the heat, had claimed the head of the evil Jafar, and didn't want to try and conquer the vast lands for Araby. The Imperial Knights, on the other hand, had a very different idea. They wanted a total victory, and the once great crusading host fractured as different knights either went home or went about their own way to win Araby. So, it took a year to take down Jafar. Anyone want to hazard a guess on how long the rest of the Crusades took? 100 years. 100 years. Generations went to war in Araby as aspiring knights heard of the wealth, fame and glory that was won in the desert lands. There's not really a single coherent story running through this era of the Crusades. As I say, the factions of knights had mostly splintered, but this is where we do see some interesting origins for knightly orders and characters. The Knights Panther were founded thanks to legends of giant cats with silvery fur that could tear men and their armour to pieces. Some warriors of the desert wore the pelts of these cats as marks of honour, and the knights then killed them and stole their idea. The Duke of Aquitaine was once lost during a siege, and while he was thought to be dead, he was found alive by his men and brought all the way back home to Bretonnia. His men didn't know this at the time, but they were protecting a lord who was turning into a vampire, one who would become the famed Red Duke. The Great Crusades are full of interesting tales like that, from all different detachments. Not everything went well for all. A siege on the ancient Arabian capital of Bel Aliad saw the entire retinue of Crusaders accidentally open a portal to the realms of chaos and join Khorne's eternal war. If they liked fighting, I guess that's not so bad, but if they just wanted gold, they were out of luck. I'll tell you who didn't want any gold though, and that's the Black Crusade, which essentially revolved just around the Black Guard or Knights of More. It was rare to see these guys move outside of Empire territory, but when they ventured out into Araby, everyone knew it was for a reason beyond riches. As you might be aware from the look of Araby on the map, you'll see it's rather close to Khemri. You know, where all the dead people live. The Black Crusade was in essence an excuse for the Knights of More to go in and kick some skeletal heads. They allied with the locals who had grown sick of the Tomb King's rule, and while many of them died, those who survived returned home with great sums of cash and plenty of stolen artifacts. The Great Crusade wasn't actually that good for the majority of people though. Plenty heard of riches to be found and set off down south, but few got to benefit from the plunder. The valley of Hammurabi was nearly made a grave for all the Knights Jaguar after a Tomb King ambush. There was also the Wives Crusade, in which many of the Knights' wives decided to go and follow their husbands, soon realising that without protection they were easy pickings for slave traders and bandits. Like all things in Warhammer, it might be dressed up with a fancy name like the Great Crusade, but it wasn't that great. There were things to be gained though. Territory was won back like the Isle of Sartosa for the Tileans, and knowledge aplenty was discovered in this strange, foreign land. The first stories of vampires arrived in the Empire from the Crusades, despite the Bloodsuckers definitely being older than that. They were known as the Terror of the Night, plucking men from camps and draining them dry. Of their blood, I mean. After the Crusades, the old world was a changed place. For better or for worse, it's up to you to decide. I'm just here for the facts. On the one hand, the mythical riches of Araby turned out to be real, and they led to the establishment of plenty of new knightly orders in the Empire. Usually, to be a knightly order, you needed to be blessed, but because these new knights were so rich, they could pay elect accounts to vouch for their existence. Some were religious, such as the newly founded Knights of the Blazing Sun, but the Blazing Sun worshipped Myrmidia, not Sigmar, and so they were sort of shoved in with the other secular orders. This did annoy the Church of Sigmar, as previously only Templars had been able to establish chivalric orders, but times had changed. On the other hand, there were plenty of lives lost, and some great men gave in to corruption thanks to the deeds they committed in Araby. Thanks to big man Jafar, chaos was to be found in abundance in Araby, and Khorne in particular loved pushing the bloodthirst of the knights to his advantage. The people of Araby grew to hate Jafar over time. After all, it had been because of his scheming that a mass of knights decided to start kicking up the sand. Some found the idea of leaving Araby ridiculous. Whether they were driven by the want for more riches or unable to get over the evil they had seen in the land, enough knights stayed to found a new city. Antok would become a haven for all crusaders and adventurers. Also, while the Great Crusade against Araby may have ended, another one was started against Nehekhara after a Bretonnian duke was assassinated on the way home. Never change, Warhammer. Never change. And so, those are the Great Crusades against Araby. One of the wealthiest nations in the known world wasn't really able to recover after this. Sure, Araby still existed, and it wasn't conquered, but it could never hope to match the powers of the Empire, Bretonnia, or the other major Old World players. Considering Jafar was straight up evil, we can't really blame the Empire for going down and kicking his teeth in either. The corruption spread by Skaven, Chaos, and the Tomb Kings also dug deep into Araby, so I can't really paint them as the villains for sticking around. The Knights, I mean. It's likely there were just as many men of valour on this journey as there were men who were just looking for loot. It's a lot more cut and dry than the real Crusades in that regard, but there's magic, so it's more of an interesting read. Anyway, that's about all I've got for you ghouls and gals. Catch you in the next one.